is, but I didn't realize that I was going into the school of the Spirit and the school of history. God never shows you everything about where you're going before you take the first step. The plan of God is like an onion. It unfolds one leaf after the other. And we thought we had a fairly sharp idea of the scope of our ministry and what we were doing, but we were shocked when God changed the thrust of what we are doing by what we are about to share with you. I remember my friend and my brother Simon Gusa and I discussing on something sometime back while we were in the UK together. There was a documentary BBC was showing, and they said it's called The History of Great Britain, and that documentary was going to answer the question, why did Britain become Great Britain? And so I eagerly was waiting to hear that answer, because what could it have been that transported or translated or converted a small island nation whose population is less than 1/5 that of Nigeria to become the greatest nation upon the face of this earth at one time that they have bequeathed upon us the English language as the global lingua franca? What were the factors that turned a nation which was just one out of many European countries? It wasn't even among the top. In those days, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, etc. were greater and bigger in influence and affluence than Great Britain. Then what turned the key for Great Britain? Because if we get a hold of this key, perhaps, and I say again, perhaps, the Lord will turn that same key in our nation and in our land. What happened to India? Most of us who were in school in one form or another in the 1970s and in the 1960s will know that we couldn't have gone through secondary school without having at least one Indian teacher. Economic migration does not happen downward. People do not leave affluence to go into poverty except motivated by a higher calling. And there was no higher calling about Indians coming to Nigeria. It was simple economic expediency. It means that at a time, the social and economic condition of India was less than that of Nigeria. Today, the movie industry of India is beginning to rival that of Hollywood, and even some of the Hollywood big-time producers are going to India to shoot their movies. The jalopy my wife and I bought in the UK, we insured it with Norwich Insurance, which is a British insurance named after a county or, after a borough in England called Norwich, perhaps a town. And when I called, because you do all the transaction by telephone, when I called Norwich Insurance, it was an Indian person that picked up the phone. And she said, "Hello, can I help you? This is Norwich Insurance. I would like to inform you that this telephone conversation is being recorded and the information provided." And the person was really now the thing that had obviously been crammed. And you couldn't interrupt it. This telephone conversation can be used and can be given to all the partner companies under the auspices of the Norwich Direct. And how can I help you, sir? So she took all my details. And she said, name. I said, Bob Alonge. I said, Akinbawi Alonge. He said, pardon? So I shortened it and I said, Bob Alonge. Title, Reverend. When I got the certificate of insurance, the certificate read Mr. Robert Alonge. So I wanted to let them know that my name was not Robert. If I have an English sounding name, it's Francis. It's not Robert. My name is Akim Bob Oye. The Bob comes from the Akim Bob Oye. So I called them and another person picked up the phone. The person was also Indian. And this time it was a man. And I called and I made my complaint and so on and so forth. They said they would effect the change and send me a new certificate. 2 days later, because the postal agency is that efficient, 2 days later, I received a new certificate. And then it says, Mr. Robert Alonge, care of Mr. Akimboboye Alonge. I said, what is wrong with this? So I called again. And again, it was an Indian person that picked up the phone. I said, now something is going on here. How could I call a British insurance company 3 times and it's an Indian that picks it up each time? As if God would answer my question. That night they showed a news report showing that 5 of the biggest telephone operations run in the UK are run from India, not from UK. In other words, Norwich Insurance, their office for administration may be in the UK, but their office for operations and booking and all of that was actually in India. So when you call a British phone number, that telephone call that you've made is routed to an information technology center in India, where the personnel have been trained and schooled and have gone through oration classes. And they will speak to you as if they are next door to your house. As if they are, the world is becoming a village. Is somebody following what I'm saying? British gas is conducted from India. British Telecom, that's the country's own government-owned telephone company. Their customer service is done from India. Norwich Insurance, Prudential Insurance, 5 of the biggest, all their customer relations is done in India, the same India. That in 25 years, we have to ask the question, what happened to India? Economic statistics shows that Indians are the highest earning immigrant group in England. America, where it is actually truly democratic. The highest or the richest, the wealthiest ethnic group per capita are the Indians. Is somebody getting me? The Indians. Now, what happened to India? Touch your neighbor and say, what happened to India? Switzerland is the only country in Europe that was absolutely unaffected by the world wars. Switzerland is the country globally that has enjoyed the greatest level of per capita affluence over the longest period of time in human history. Switzerland. That is, they have maintained a standard of living for many years, more years than any other kingdom has been able to achieve in human history. Switzerland. Switzerland, like England, was another insignificant, unknown, unheard of. In the days of the fiefdom, Switzerland was not even considered to be a kingdom. Is somebody hearing what I'm saying? It was a duke or something they had over it. It wasn't a serious place to contend with. What happened to Switzerland? Is somebody with me? Where my wife and I are working on a documentary, and these are some of the things we are going to be sharing. And we are believing God that He will turn around the captivity of the sons of Cush. So what happened to England? When we watched that BBC programs, Simon watched it, I watched it. What they did was that they documented the greatness of India. Went to all the colonies, Burma, Hong Kong, China, India, Nigeria, Ghana, and so on and so forth, and showed the might of the British and how they ruled, and how, a British messenger in the post office will be traveling across River Niger, and they would have a buffalo. You know what a buffalo is. They would take a buffalo, skin the buffalo, make the skin of the buffalo into a balloon. And then they would have a human being to blow it. They didn't have pumps. They would blow it. Of course, it's a Niger man. Blow the thing. And then you have one, that is one tire. Then another one, then another one, then another one. And then they would put some wooden kind of thing on top of it. And then it will be two Africans who would be with their legs inside the water like a propeller boat, who will be paddling and paddling and paddling. And should the buffalo skin begin to release, it is that person who must begin to blow it so that it will inflate, so that the onibo on top will not sink. Do you understand what I'm saying? They showed the glories of the Maharajas that they exalted and so on. They showed how the power of Britain was in the days of her greatness. And I was waiting for the answer to my question. What exactly happened to Great Britain? How? What was the key? The closest they came to the answer was that it was the Victorians. They said it was the Victorians. That all the greatness of Britain came in the Victorian age. But exactly what happened in the Victorian age? Who were they? No answer. How did America become what she is today? But I don't even want to use America because, that is far. India, you saw India. They came here. I had a chemistry teacher. No talking in my class. No talking, no talking. India of the days of Mother Teresa, the same Calcutta they are talking about. Go to Calcutta today. It's not the same place at all. So what happened to them? Now let me say this to you. Because by the time I begin to bring forth my answers, you might want to challenge me and say, then why doesn't history record that? If that is so, why is it not so in the history books? Why? Why is it not so? Let me tell you a small Bible story, but that's not what we're going to read today. The Bible says that Pharaoh was the king of Egypt. Am I correct? And Pharaoh dreamt a dream. It troubled his heart so much that they called a young Hebrew boy whose name was Joseph to interpret the dream. Joseph was smart enough to make sure he conducted himself well, dressed well, shaved, and made himself preferable to Pharaoh. He got there and interpreted the dream to Pharaoh. He said, Pharaoh, now listen to me. This is the interpretation of your dream. This is what is about to come to pass, so we can see foresight. And then he says, Pharaoh, in order to circumvent the disastrous result of what is about to come to pass, this and that and that and that is what you must do. So we see oversight. Hello? And then he says, Pharaoh, please, I don't want you to buy off all the produce in the land, because if you do that, there will be an artificial scarcity that will be produced and inflation would be the result. So just take 1/5, an amount that is considerable for storage and yet inconsiderable that the economy will not notice the difference. One day I'll preach you a sermon about God's principles of economics, and you'll see what the value of 1/5 is in the eyes of God. And then he goes on to say, and Pharaoh, I want you to understand that don't just appoint some riffraff, because this is a very delicate matter. And whoever will have the power of finances or have the power over food in a famine becomes greater than Pharaoh. So Pharaoh, find a faithful man. At the end of it, Pharaoh said, where else can we find a person if not Joseph? Now watch this. I want you to see something. Pharaoh was just another king. Just any other king, like kings are kings, before Joseph. But do you know what happened? After the years of famine, the Bible says, after the years of plenty, in the first year, the Bible says the people brought their money and bought food from Pharaoh. Who was administering it? Joseph. Who was responsible for it? Joseph. And they brought their money until their money finished. So now it means that all money in Egypt became personal property of Pharaoh. Listen, the next year, the Bible says the money was finished, so they all brought their livestock. The livestock will die anyway because it is famine and there's no water to graze them. And they brought their livestock until their livestock was finished. That is how every livestock in Egypt became the personal property of Pharaoh. When their livestock finished the next year, the Bible says they began to bring their lands. And they brought their land and brought their land until all their land was finished. That is how all the land in Egypt became personal property by sale, not by monarchy of Pharaoh. And who is responsible for that? Joseph. When their lands finished, what did they do? The Bible says they brought their children and sold them as servants to Pharaoh. And then Joseph brought the technology of God again and said, Pharaoh, don't bring them into your house because you will have to feed them. They are your property. Send them back. But now, anything they produce in this life, 1/5 of it will become property of Pharaoh. So technically, they are your servants because they have sold themselves to you and their children and their children's children. It says, but let them go. You are a benevolent master. Let them go and walk the field, and 1/5 of it will come to Pharaoh. That is how all of Egypt became Pharaoh's servants. The next year, the Bible says they sold themselves. Now, do you understand what that means? It means Pharaoh became a god because of Joseph. Did you get that? Do you realize that secular history does not attribute anything to Joseph? Did you know that Egypt never built one single pyramid until Joseph? Do you know what I have found in my research? Because I began to juxtapose the times and everything. The first pyramids appeared 30 years after the time of Joseph. 30 years. Remember that it was the pyramids and the cities, the great cities, that the Hebrew slaves were used to build. It means those things were not there before the Hebrew slaves. Even the Bible attests to that. Do you know what I think was responsible for the pyramids? You know what the Egyptians began to do with pyramids? They used to try to preserve the bodies of the pharaoh in pyramids. So pyramids became a symbol of preservation. How many of you have heard about the groundnut pyramids in Nigeria? Do you know what I think? I was telling Deaconess Kerry, she didn't understand why I was saying this. I heard a historian who told me that the staff of Oromio that is in Ife, that the inscriptions on it is written in hieroglyphic, which is ancient Egyptian. By implication, the Yorubas migrated downward from Egypt and came downward. They were making settlements. So I can understand how we came by the groundnut pyramids, because we know that the migration came down from Egypt. But then it tells us what pyramids were initially used for. Joseph says, make storage cities where you will store the corn. And he gave to Pharaoh the technology of preservation that baffled all understanding of our Greek at the time. And he was so good at it that things they did not think could last for 1 year or 2 years began to last for a long time, until people now began to mystify pyramids and felt if it can preserve us in the midst of famine, it means it can preserve us for eternity. And then they began to now attach mysticisms and everything. That's what I think pyramids mean, and the facts support that. Is somebody with me? But you know what I really wanted to say to you? Just 4 generations after, just 4, after Joseph. And a generation is 20 years. A generation is the time it takes from when someone is born to when he is of childbearing age. 20 years, or let's say 25 years. So less than 100 years after Joseph. You know what the Bible now records? It says, and there arose a Pharaoh that remembered not Joseph. I want that statement to sink in your heart so you understand the implication. And there arose a Pharaoh that did not know why he was who he was. That did not know the factors responsible or the people responsible for making him who he is. And that was lost in just 4 generations. The pharaohs themselves did not remember, how much more their subjects. Is somebody hearing me?